Good morning, everyone. We can do better. Good morning, everyone. Did you know that on average, nearly 30% of the budgets for the purchase of vaccines in 22 largely low-income countries were unspent over a multi-year period, even as these governments officially reported stockouts or shortages of life-saving vaccines for thousands of children on 96 separate occasions during that period? Did you also know that in more than a dozen countries in which agriculture is an important source of employment for poor sections of the population, the governments did not spend the equivalent of $1 in every $6 out of their agriculture budgets? I'm sorry to be the bearer of such grim facts so early in the morning, but I know that you have busy schedules and wish to get straight to the point with you. On behalf of the International Budget Partnership and our co-hosts, UNICEF, and the governments of France and Zambia, I warmly welcome you to this meeting. My name is Vivek Ramkumar, and I'm Senior Director of Policy at the International Budget Partnership. The IBP collaborates with civil society organizations and other stakeholders towards a world in which active and engaged citizens use open budgeting systems to shape policies and practices that promote equity and justice on a sustainable basis. We know that most of you don't work in finance ministries and are not responsible for the budgets of line ministries. But the reason why we wanted to have you in a discussion on budgets is to understand the impact that lack of credibility in government budgets can have on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We believe that this topic merits more attention and discussion among UN agencies and member states so that joint technical and political solutions can be identified and implemented. Many reputable opinion polls around the world are showing that public trust in government is at an all-time low. Citizens and civil society organizations are frustrated by a lack of credibility in government budgets. When budgets are not credible, it diminishes confidence in government, reduces trust in political institutions, and enhances disengagement from government and public policy debates. This trend should cause alarm to governments who rely on taxes paid by their citizens to fund their budgets. It should also be of concern to the international development community, which has prioritized an expansion of domestic resource mobilization to finance the Sustainable Development Goals. In this context, it is fitting that the SDG framework has recognized the importance of budget credibility and created an indicator to measure budget deviations. SDG 16.6.1 measures whether government spending is in line with the country's approved budget. This is an important overall measure of government commitment to sustainable development, but it is also critical to the achievement of most of the other SDGs. Key goals in health, education, and water and sanitation are unlikely to be achieved if their budgets are not fully spent. The data collected by the UN shows that at the global level, countries tend to underspend their budgets, and this problem is more severe in low-income countries. From a layperson's perspective, lack of budget credibility manifests itself when governments make promises on budget programs that are ultimately not implemented in line with the promises that were made. But budget practitioners know that these issues are more complex, and especially complex are the reasons for budget deviations. Macroeconomic shocks, national emergencies, and revenue shortfalls can routinely derail government budget plans. These issues, coupled with several others, such as poor absorption capacities in line ministries, unanticipated delays in large capital projects, and delays in the transfer of donor funds, can undermine government budget execution. The issue of budget credibility has not been widely studied at the global level, and the existing literature misses two of the most important issues that lie at the heart of how we understand and interpret budget deviations. One, it does not measure the impact of budget deviations on citizens. And two, it does not measure justifications, and especially the inadequacy of justifications provided by governments for underspending and how they are accountable for them. Last year, we began a project in collaboration with UNICEF and other institutions to focus on these gaps in the global understanding of the nature of the budget credibility challenge. I wish to highlight three key findings that were uncovered by our research that are also included in the package of materials that you have in front of you. One, there is an underspending problem. On average, countries underspend their budgets by nearly 10%, which is largely driven by capital or infrastructure budgets. Low-income countries, on average, underspend their agriculture and energy budgets by 31%, and their health budgets are underspent on average by 22%. Two, external financing from donors accounts for nearly 40% of the reported underspending. While we still need to uncover the underlying reasons why there is so much of underspending associated with external financing, we think it could be due to the unpredictability and poor reporting of aid flows. And three, governments do a very poor job of providing explanations on the causes and consequences of budget deviations. We know that lack of budget credibility can be driven by technical factors, such as deficient revenue forecasting models, weak procurement systems, and inadequate procedures and practices to control the shifting of budgeted funds during the year. We also know that political factors, including the role of legislatures in budgeting, are leading to unrealistic revenue and expenditure targets being set in government budgets that are ultimately not achieved. The solutions to enhance budget credibility will inevitably vary from one country to another and involve different actors playing complementary roles. Governments will need to put in place systems and enhance capacities so that their budgets are more realistic and deviations are gradually reduced. For example, the Public Works Ministry, which is the largest spending ministry in Afghanistan, has more than doubled its budget execution rates in the last couple of years through a combination of better hiring practices, improved internal coordination, and cooperation with donors. Oversight institutions and civil society organizations will need to more closely monitor government budget execution and hold governments to account for delivering against their plans. Over the past year, our civil society partners in 9 countries have tracked the budgets of specific government programs and engaged in discussions with relevant agencies on how their budgets can be better managed. International donors will need to improve the predictability and reporting of their aid flows and support a variety of capacity building activities. And finally, budget deviations can occur and sometimes are necessary. But when they happen, governments should say and show why and how they happen. In this context, international standards and norms on justifications for budget deviations can help expand transparency surrounding such deviations. It's in the spirit of seeking joint solutions that we have brought together representatives from different sections of society to discuss and describe their work and experiences in mitigating the budget credibility challenge. Beswada Wilson, the national convener of India's preeminent organization on the rights of manual scavengers, will describe how lack of budget credibility impacts manual scavengers in India. We have a representative from Zambia, Mr. Mulele Maketo Mulele, who will discuss the links between planning, budget formulation, and budget execution in the context of improving credibility. Lithare Khori from the Lesotho Finance Ministry will describe the steps taken by her government to improve budget execution and thereby budget credibility. We'll then open up the floor to questions, comments, and remarks from anyone who is interested in contributing. Next, we'll move to our last two speakers. Emeric Chuswell from the French Foreign Ministry will discuss the steps that France has taken to support countries in improving their budget system. And Alex Euster will also describe how UNICEF works with countries to improve social sector budgeting. We'll once again open the floor to questions, comments, and remarks from anyone who is interested in contributing before closing this session. With that, let me hand over to Bezwada Wilson from India's Manual Scavengers campaign.
That's not required. We can speak. This is
also on the video. Sir.
Okay. Good morning. I am talking about when we talk about animal science, that it is collective technology, but it is something which is a different which I want to just inform you that. This is about the community which is dedicated only for the one work, that is cleaning the fecal matters. So it is a literally, there will be a toilets, so without any water facility, and there the scavenging women, mostly in the individual dry latrines, they have to go and clean the human excreta, put it into the baskets and take the baskets for the outside, and they will throw in somewhere, collect place. From there again, another group of the people, they will carry that to the dumping yards. This is the one practice. This is there with the community just past 5,000 years. Untouchability made the people to do like this. If you born into the some particular caste, those people assigned this job. I also belongs to the same one community, which is the manual scavenging. My parents were the scavengers, brother, sister, all relatives, and the whole community where I born. Around me, whole my childhood, it is just a scavenging community, scavenger line, scavenger school, all very clearly branded line. So such circumstances, the community past many years suppression, they are not willing to come out that I am doing this. Early morning go cleaning, and before sun rises, move to the back. So think that illusion that nobody knows that I am a scavenger. But other than us, whole the civil society and the whole the people, everybody call us as a very derogatory name. It is called as a bungi, which means the person who carries the fecal matters life. So when we go to the school also, when people say that, we get angry about that. And all these are the one this thing. The same way when the cities has taken place, you may think that I am talking about some rural, very remote places. No, I'm talking about the capital cities of the many states, including close to the Delhi also, there are the some parts. Then second, when it is a urbanization has taken place, we do think that each development will make some kind of a change in the lives of the people. But for the marginalized, oppressed, particularly the Dalits, Adivasis, and the women, their lives has not changed. This is a stark reality. When we move there, again there are the flush out toilets. There is no underground drainage system, and it is linked with the septic tanks. Once the septic tank get filled, again we have to go and clean. So again, when we clean the excreta from the empty the septic tanks, there are the fatal deaths. And the people, when they go enter, and there is a methane gas or something, and they don't know what it is. By the time they will die, second person will enter and he also died. Then after three people, then it comes in the newspaper, here are there the people died. And even in the cities like Delhi and the cosmopolitan, there is very few places there is a underground drainage system, sewage. But there also, we don't have any kind of a mechanized way of cleaning where the manholes, the people go inside and they have to clean even today when I'm talking. And like this, we struggled with the great resilience and we made this as an issue. The women came out and they started telling everybody that I'm a scavenger, not because it is my choice. You made me a scavenger. So this is the once it has become the women broken their silence and came to the street. We felt that government will do something. Then the government prohibited the practice and they made that we will reposition or the rehabilitate all those people engaged in that we identified. 1993 they passed the law prohibited. Till 2003 they have not even identified single person for any rehabilitation to reposition such scavengers. Many, for the sake of dignity, self-respect, we follow B.R. Ambedkar. He is an architecture of the Indian Constitution. So we feel that we must have our own self-respect. So many thrown their baskets, women, and they are all waiting. Their rehabilitation not happened. 2003, we went to the court. So court has passed after 11 years. Many times the evidences we given, but they did no judgment. And they said finally, people who died in the sewer line they must get the compensation of the 10 lakhs and Indian rupees. Then we started thinking how many people died. And for our records, government has not done any enumeration. We did enumeration and we found that such 1,870 such people died and their documents we have kept ready for the government, but government did nothing for any kind of a compensation. Then all these struggle, people started coming to all the state governments across the country, the 22 states where the Safai Karmachari Andolan spearheading the movement, where I am also part of that. Then the government started in 2013-14, like from 10 to 13-14, the budget allocation started. Then 2014, again, we found that the budget allocation has gone down and whatever they allocated, they have not even spent even a 1% of the budget. And that also, that 1% for their administration, constituting the committees, meeting expenditure, not for the rehabilitation of the women scavengers who are waiting for the liberation so many years. So my submission request to here is, when we are all thinking about the communities, we should not leave anyone behind us. Already 5,000 years we have left a community, we have no identity. Our crisis is we have no identity. I can't come and say that I'm a scavenger. It is a very shameful. So from that identity, I want to become just a citizen of the country, the great democracy, where again in this process, we cannot leave that community and the budgets and all those things. Recently, with the International Budget Partnership, we joined hands and we started looking our own budget allocations and the monitoring and how it has to reach to the people. This process also to be strengthened, and we need an international community's solidarity, support to prevent the deaths in the sewer and septic tank and get the liberation and rehabilitation, meaningful, dignified livelihood for the women scavengers. That is what we are asking. And we request all of you to say no to the human scavenging anywhere in the globe, not just in India, anywhere. And in this 21st century, there is no point. And we have not developed even any single apparatus which can go and clean the sewer line and septic tanks. For that, not even a 1 rupee penny released by any government so far. So in this circumstance, we are on the crossroads. We have to take a stand very clearly. How do we incorporate or bring the community which we have left already from the mainstream?
Thank you very much. I was introduced. I'm Lele Maketa Mlele from Zambia. I'm from the Ministry of National Development Planning. Maybe just to start by thanking the International Budget Partnership and UNICEF for putting up this forum where we can exchange views and experiences of each country, and also perhaps in the process learn from each other. Just as a background to Zambia, we run a budget of about $6 to $7 billion annually, which is about between 25 to 30% of GDP. Coming from Ministry of Planning, my job is to develop development plans, which are 5-year plans. And these 5-year plans are executed using annual budgets, which are done on a yearly basis. And therefore, talking about budget credibility, I always want to start with looking at the link between the budget and the plan, and now the budget and the execution, and also between the execution of the budget and the plan, and looking at how things are moving. In Zambia, we run a cash budget, which means that on a daily basis, government raises revenue and gives the different spending agencies the resources. A couple of years ago, we did invest a lot in terms of infrastructure. That includes health, education, or water and sanitation, all the infrastructure you can think of, roads, airports, and so on. And at the time we were making those heavy investments, growth in Zambia was quite high. We were averaging over 6% growth. But in 2015, we suffered the first drought in more than 2 decades, which meant that power generation, because Zambia relies mostly on hydropower, had to go down by about 400 megawatts of power. And that had an effect on the economy in that a good number of industries could not get power to get the economy growing and for growth to continue to grow. So as a result, the country started growing below 3%. Now, growing below 3% has an impact on the budget in that the amount of revenue that you get from the cake, which is not growing as big as you anticipated, is smaller, and therefore to have budgets allocated to different spending agencies has become quite challenging. To the extent that from 2015, government did announce some austerity measures where we had to cut down on certain expenditures. And again, this year, we suffered a similar fate in that, again, hydro generation has gone down because we have less rainfall. And for a country that is dependent on agriculture, most livelihoods are actually affected. And this has to displace resources for certain budget spending and channel them to more to do with disasters that we're experiencing. And therefore that has, to a large extent, affected our budget. So basically that is in terms of background to the budget. But largely, the revenues which are projected by government for the budgets, we normally receive, for a good part of it, we actually do get the revenues that we do. But the issue is that there are certain statutory obligations that government has to pay within months, and that is where now managing the budget becomes very difficult, because there are months when we have debt service, and when there's debt service, which might be high because we've issued 3 international bonds, and they're quite heavy in terms of paying the interest rate, you may have to postpone some expenditures for that month, but we have a mechanism to make sure that things catch up. But when it comes to spending on education, health, and water and sanitation, which are mostly do with SDGs 3, 4, and 7, we do try to make sure that those are much more protected, that all the key programs in these sectors are actually isolated from the others. But going forward, what I'm seeing is that the budgets have actually reduced for a number of spending agencies in the year 2020 in the proposed budget. And what this is doing is that we have to also cut down on expenditures for education and health. But the first core in those sectors is normally issues to do with infrastructure development. And when we cut down the infrastructure development, we still protect the other budget lines within those particular sectors. So at least I can say that for these sectors, they are getting their resources and they are moving. I think you did touch a little bit maybe also on the revenue side, is that we're a country that is dependent on copper, and copper is about the volumes and the price on the London Metal Exchange. So if the London Metal Exchange price goes down, our budget tends to be affected because the pricing that we get from mineral royalty is really dependent on the pricing that is there and the quantities that are produced. And the quantities are also affected by various factors, operational challenges, sometimes even the weather itself, depending on what type of mining is deployed. So I think those are the real key things that we have. But this year, as government, will be undertaking a mid-year review of our plan. And part of the review process is to check how misaligned the budget has been in terms of execution with what we initially planned for. But to some extent, we think that in the social sector spending, that is more or less protected, but it is really in the other areas. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ditare from Lesotho. As Vivek had mitigated the problems we have with budget credibility, Lesotho is no different. So I will not repeat on that. However, we have taken initiatives to try and correct that by trying first to the internal coordination, to improve the internal coordination. We did this by trying to have linkages between that, which is where all our donor funding, grants, loans are managed, with cash and budget management. We also tried to incorporate the cash planning within the budget process so that it is quite included in there. We empowered the liquidity management committees and technical committees to ensure that we are able to know what to do when. We also ensured that we give information to the MDA in time for them to make commitments and make procurement, and try to make those procedures simpler so that we try to not improve on the budget credibility. We also instituted procurement reforms by investing in developing procurement management. We also tried to have program coordinators to oversee on the projects that are going on. That has helped a lot. We enhanced cooperation with donors as well by encouraging more direct budget support. We also accelerated disbursement using donor procedures by setting maximum deadline. That has also helped. We have also embarked on the transparency issues by engaging the civil society more to have a say in what we do, and we hold pre and budget consultations. This has been through the UNICEF, and is an initiative that started in this financial year. So we are still yet to see how will this have an impact on credibility, because we need them to have a say to say this is what we needed, but we didn't see it executed. Hopefully we will achieve what is intended. We have achieved some things in the process. We used to be a little bit over 20% underspending of the total budget, of which most of it was contributed by the capital budget, but we are now ranging at around between 10-15. We are much lesser, but still not there yet. We are still working on it. It's still work in progress. We also have a partnership program with UNICEF on public finance for children, which we are also doing to ensure that we do touch on these social factors that affect our citizens. We do provide more budget data, including execution in released and published documentation, which we do publish online. We are collaborating with IBP, we are collaborating with UNICEF, we have another one, CABRI, and other international organizations, which I may not have had mentioned. There are lessons learned as we have been doing this thing. That to achieve the SDGs will require more investment. And this would need both domestic and external resources to be invested. And it is not just the additional resources that will help us achieve the SDGs, but also to actually do what the resources are intended for, timely for that matter. In this context, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, as a PFM official, I would say the ability of governments to efficiently collect revenues and spend them in an accountable and transparent manner is instrumental for nations seeking to expand their economic growth and increase available resources to pursue national objectives. I thank you.
Now we have 20 minutes or so for questions, comments, and especially any remarks that people might have also on the problems surrounding budget credibility that you know of or have experienced at the country level. And also importantly, any solutions that you've seen either implemented or think should be tried out to mitigate the challenges associated with budget credibility. I know we have people joining us also online, and they can share their comments through social media, and that will also be curated and share it with the rest of the audience. So the floor is open now to anyone who's interested in contributing. Please raise your hands if you wish to contribute. Ula first, Sabia, and then so we've got 4 people already.
So you said this year you are having a term review to the budget execution. Can you try and talk about the previous years, what is execution, what credibility? And I looked at the Zambia Ministry of Health budget, and I seem to remember in like 2 years ago, you had a really nice line or column, what was executed last year, what you're having this year, you know, just those 2 columns are really helpful. And then that column disappeared. I think in the other budgets, so like the budget structure changed, and I just want to say that that simple column where you can see what was spent last year in all the lines is really helpful, and very few countries have that column. But I really like that you had it at least 1 year in Zambia.
Let's collect a few more questions and then we'll pass on our comments.
Thanks, Richard from SOS Children's Villages. What I would be interested in from the government's perspective, such a process, what value added do you see in order to improve the budgeting and implementation process? If I turn this over to an NGO like SOS Children's Villages, of course, we have great interest that we see which direction the budget is going, because ultimately, if we want to make our work in the country sustainable, we need to know by when the government will be able to do that job, which for a time period we are doing for them. And if we are in line with the thinking of sustainable development goals, we have to get in accordance when is this handover taking place. And we need transparency.
Good morning. My name is Xavier Mambo. I work with the Open Society Foundation and happen to be Zambian as well. So it's good to see the Minister of Finance. And my question or rather comment is to both Lesotho and Zambia. I think when you talk about budget credibility and budget planning, you're mostly so far focusing on the execution part and also the expenditure. But I wanted you to comment, maybe both of you, on the link, because part of budget planning should also be about how you're raising the money. And so far, the focus has been on donor money's predictability affecting credibility. But I wanted you to comment on how you, as budget officers or Minister of Finance, work with the revenue authorities to ensure that you're not just focusing on getting the money in, but also expanding the tax base. And what kind of conversation goes on the policy side as well as on the tax administration side.
Last question, yes, please. From Malawi, the Member of Parliament.
Thank you. My name is Noah Chimpeni. I'm a Member of Parliament from Malawi, and I'm also a Vice Chair of Public Accounts Committee. So mine is not a question, but maybe a comment. I think this comment would have been better if I was maybe one of the panelists, but that's not. I want to say that this, as I'm standing here, our Parliament is looking at the budget for this financial year, which will be passing next week. So now, when you talk of budget credibility, I think most of the times, most of the years, not for just the current government, but almost all the government that have come in during the multi-party, the budgets are never credible at this point. They only become credible during the February mid-year review, because there's always that section of the year when we look at the budget. Almost every year at that time, the budget is revised downwards. That's why I'm saying that at that point is when it becomes credible. Because right now it's just the wish list, where you know that currently the government is saying that they will do less borrowing, and yet there's a deficit in the budget. Now the question is, who is going to how and who is going to finance that deficit? Maybe the only way to run away from that would be not to spend on some very important issues, like social sector issues. Another one very contentious issue in the budget this time around is that there's a proposition by government to build 2 stadia for the 2 most popular teams in the country. And these are private teams, one of which is sponsored by a Japanese motor vehicle company. So obviously that company should be able to build at least a training ground. And these grounds will be built in a city where these 2 teams are resident in 1 city. Now some of us will think that why not build one and they share? Because the only match which will maybe at least bring a reasonable crowd to those stadiums is the match between the 2 teams only, not another team. So it means most of the time the stadium will be empty. So why should government spend public money on private teams? I was reading this morning that the opposition are also saying that they will support the proposal, mainly for one reason alone, because of fear of the backlash from the supporters of these 2 teams. Because right now, the political environment in Malawi is very volatile. We had elections in May, which are being disputed in courts. So obviously, if I was president also, I would try to do things that are political, or to look at spending, which is politically sweet, like spending on certain tools are now to turn the attention away from the current issues, but other issues. And that is what is affecting our budget most is somebody mentioned is about public debt, especially international debt. We're paying about $120-something million budget. So that is also affecting the budget. And of course, we never budget for corruption, but it consumes a lot of, obviously, not only in Malawi, but most of the countries, corruption consumes a lot of the budget, which affects, by the end of the day, it affects people in the village. So there is more, but without pretending, so that just share. Thank you very much.
So let's try and get some answers to the questions. They were almost all directed at the government's officials.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. I think with regard to the first question, the mid-term review I was referring to, the mid-term review of the National Development Plan, which is a 5-year plan. So we are 2.5 years into execution, and we have to do a mid-term review. But I guess the column, I don't know which document you're looking at, but in our annual progress report, we do have a column which talks about, which has the budget for the year and how much was released, but not the expenditure as such. Because at that point, you don't have budgeted accounts, you don't know exactly how it has been executed. Spent the previous year.
The previous year. So you can compare.
Yeah. I think what we have is just the budget and the release, but at some point, especially in the midterm review, we look at now the expenditures after the audit has actually taken place. There's a time lag between the time we produce this document, because in the annual progress reports, we produce it within the first quarter of the year. But at that time, we would not have had the accounts audited for us to actually put the actual expenditure. But in the midterm review, we'll be able to do that. The second question was on I don't know whether we answered the first question, or do I pass on to the Lesotho? Maybe I don't know, comments on it.
Well, I think it was directed to Zambia.
Actually, yes, it was directed to Zambia. The second question was on value added, and you were talking about handover. I didn't understand the handover. Handover for?
Concretely on the example of our work as students, we are caring for children with post-traumatic care, which actually should be on top of the government, and also paid by the government. And if I think sustainably, of course, by when the government will be able to pay for these things.
Yeah, interesting question. Very tough to answer by myself. I think, yes, indeed. I think some government programs are trying to integrate some of these issues in trying to take care of some people, especially what the Ministry of Community Development has designed some programs. But I think sometimes due to budget limitations that government may not really comprehensively reach everyone. But there are certain flagship programs which they try to reach out. For instance, we have the social cash transfer, I think, which looks at certain households that are below a certain threshold of income. And some of the issues they look at is whether they have orphans and vulnerable children within those households. But right now, what I know is that within the sector, they're trying to develop a comprehensive database to see how households can benefit from the different programs which are designed to make sure that within a vulnerable household, you still have a program that takes a child to school or pays school fees, just to have different interventions of the family to try to comprehensively link them. But as to the roadmap, as to when we can actually hand over, is very difficult because the resources are not really there.
Basically, it's linked to the value added of this process.
Oh, I see.
For our sector, of course, it's very high value. It's transparency.
Yeah. No, it is definitely linked. Yeah.
Also, the third question on the resource mobilization, the revenue side, I think that was Xavier's
Yes,
question.
yeah, from Xavier. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Apparently for Zambia, in terms of the budget, the amount that we get from cooperating partners is actually quite low. The only problem is we have certain expenditures within the budget, especially debt service, which has grown quite significantly, which seems to be removing some of the resources to some of the areas we need to take it. But the question was, what is it that we are doing? I think both on policy and in administration, there are quite a lot of things that are being done. On the administration side, it's about the platforms that you use to make payments. And this tends to reduce certain leakages, especially when you use digital platforms for payments. I think I was reading one report where some revenue had gone up by over 300%. I think it's immigration, by simply moving from cash payments into payments on digital platforms. So these are some of there are quite a number of of things that government is trying to work on to try to ensure that there's efficiency in terms of payment. On the policy side, again, there are quite a number of things. I think there's been some changes, especially in the mine tax regime, to see how, because I think the big debate in Zambia has been mining is quite significant, plays a significant role in the economy, especially with regards to export earnings, because over 75% come from the mining sector. But the big debate is the take from the mining sector. People are not too satisfied how much we are getting from these extractive industries. And therefore, last year, I think the minister did announce in the budget some of the reforms to try to increase the revenue coming from the mines. But what is more important actually is to grow the economy, have industry, and broaden the number of people that are coming into the brackets where they pay income and so on. I think that is much more significant for the economy and derive revenue to meet all the obligations that we have.
Yeah, thank you. I'll also go back to the second question of value adding, and we are actually trying to start to. We don't have any institutionalized way of saying this is how we are able to say we will deliver by this time. But yes, we have realized that it is actually necessary to do that, and we are still working on it with all the activities that we are embarking on. There is also an issue raised on the revenue part as well that goes to government. We as Lesotho have for the longest time not been having crisis, but I think you have to get a pinch for you to wake up. So we have realized that we've had reserves that are just sitting there, not invested anywhere. So those are the kind of things that we are saying we should now be thinking of how to do these things to get more revenue. We also have companies which have invested in the country, which are not probably not monitored enough to give the revenue that they collect to the government. So those are the kind of things that we are now saying, these are things that we should be taking up and making sure that they happen, we get the revenue that is required.
Could I just make a comment? I think the Honorable Member of Parliament from Malawi did say something very interesting about the stadium. But maybe just to mention that in Zambia, we now, as part of the austerity measures, it was felt that we need to have a strong public investment planning unit. And within our Ministry of Development Planning, we now have a dedicated department that has done that. And we've developed a system for public investments system, and there's a board that has been agreed to be appointed, which looks at public investments planning. So I think it's very important that each public investment has to be reviewed, has to be appraised to make sure that it adds value, whether you need 2 stadia or 1 for those 2 teams and so on. I think we must look at everything in terms of the value that it brings, both in terms of the returns, both social and
Thank you. Any other? We can take maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll come back to more questions after the next 2 speakers. So maybe 1, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Hamza. I wanted to ask the representative from Zambia and Lesotho, your budget, how open is it? And how do you define priorities in your budget? Lastly, how do you get feedback from citizens? What are the roles of citizens? And do you also have focus group discussion with children, because we're talking about social sector? Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. John Bosses from UNICEF. I just want to ask a little bit about this question of protecting social expenditures. The speaker from Malawi, it's from Zambia explained that in the context of declining budget revenues, the government is aiming to protect social expenditures. But what happens? You mentioned that you are more likely to protect the recurrent expenditures than the social infrastructure. And if we think about the consequences for the SDGs, and we know that there's certainly in Africa, there's rising demand for these services of education and health. I just wonder if there's something more that could be done to look at how you allocate the resources within the social sectors from the outset, rather than just cutting the infrastructure spending rather than moving on.
Very interesting. How open is the budget? I think the process of the budgets, ideally, and I'm using the word ideally underlining it, is that it's supposed to involve a lot of key stakeholders in the budgeting process. So what we normally produce is a green paper, and the green paper is made available to everyone. And during that time, people can debate and contribute towards that. The only things that I said ideally is that we've been producing the green paper normally about a month to go, sometimes maybe 6 weeks to go before the budget. It would be lovely to have the green paper at least 90 days before the budget, so that there's adequate time to debate and for government to listen and to integrate some of those issues. But having said that, I must say that with the plan, the 7 National Development Plan that we are implementing, we've designed coordination structures which help us try to get different views about different issues. So around May, our budget, by the way, will be announced this week on Friday on the 27th. But around May, we do get a lot of different stakeholders to actually get to discuss the budget and have input, which will ultimately reflect into the green paper. So we have a way of trying to get some of this information. And I remember this past year, we had a lot of input, especially from the mining sector, in terms of the tax regime that they wish to have, and so on and so forth, from the mining chamber, the manufacturers, and all the different stakeholders. So there is a platform where inputs are derived. And we have focus group with children. To my knowledge, at national level, not, but maybe at district or maybe within certain specific sectors, these things happen, but I'm not quite aware. The second question is on expenditure on social spending. Yes, infrastructure is key because that's what you use to expand access, whether it's to education, to health, and all the facilities. But what we've done because of the austerity measures is that we started quite a lot of, I think we're building over 300 hospitals across the country, 600 health posts across the country. So what we've done is to try to do it more in a systematic way to finish this, as well as education, is to look at those that are 80% and above, and make sure that we allocate resources to those that are 80% and above, finish them, then go to the next level, and just like that. So that is how we're actually approaching it. Because previously you can construct 800 health facilities all at the same time and spending little money across, but not even opening one. So what we've tried to do is to pull the resources, look at those that are advanced, allocate the resources, finish them, then go to the next, just like that. So there's a systematic approach which we are doing in order to still achieve the goal of expanding access.
Thank you. Yes, how transparent is our budget? I would say it hasn't been, but we have had our first round in 2017 with OPS, not because we were not doing what we were supposed to do, only because we did documents but did not publish, or even the publishing that we did may have not been accessible to everyone. But now we are publishing every budget document online. While it's not every citizen who may have access to that, but at least majority would. And mentioning on the majority, we also expect the young generations, especially, to be able to be accessing that kind of information online. However, we do still have publications and hard copies, which may not reach everyone, but anyone who wishes to get the documentation can get from our office, either in a soft copy or hard copy. And is the focus on the children? Not clearly. It's knowing, yes. Know in that there is no clear way of saying this is how much children will get from different MDAs. No, it's not. But however, with the public finance for children project that we are doing, we hope we will sometime reach there, because it's quite important to ensure that the future generation is actually budgeted for and gets the things that they need to get. Okay, the social protection is not for us.
And then maybe just one thing, which I may have left out. I was talking about before the budget process. After the budget, we do publish what we call a citizen's budget, which we try to explain to the citizen in an easier way exactly what government is trying to do with each and every budget. So immediately after Friday, we announce a budget, the citizen budget will be published a few days later, and a group of people will go around the country to explain the budget in more details.
A great resource for you to find out about budget transparency is our Open Budget Survey and Open Budget Index. You can find that out in 150 countries. So let me now hand over to Emeritus as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramkumar, and thanks for UNICEF for hosting us here in New York. My name is Emeric Chouzville. I'm the head of the development department within the French Foreign Affairs Ministry. I just wanted to start with a little note regarding IBP. France has been partnering with IBP since 2016 to manage. And because we're going to talk about concrete examples here of how we can move on this issue of budget credibility and sustainability. And one of the things we have been doing is organizing with several ministries of finance, civil society organization, with the help of IBP, several high-level meetings or technical meetings over the last few years, including with some regional organizations such as the West African Economic and Monetary Union and the Community Economic and Monetaire de l'Afrique Centrale. We are currently planning a third high-level meeting that will take place in the margins of the World Bank annual meeting next spring with the help of IBP. And there was also a little meeting in Paris a few weeks ago in August, gathering several representatives from Africa to understand the budget survey conducted by IBP every 2 years. So this is one of the concrete examples that France has been doing. And I would like now to continue on this to say that, France has a long and deep tradition regarding public finances and taxations and how having a sound budget. And I think this is where we have implemented different initiatives and collaborated with the different institutions to move towards how we can make sure money is used for what it's supposed to be used for, especially in the context of the SDGs. So apart from our collaboration with IBP, we have promoted different and participated in different initiatives that you may know. And if not, that I would encourage you to look at or to participate in, depending on where you are, from either government or multinational organizations or NGOs. The first is France participating in the creation of the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Initiative, what we call PFA, or PFA in French. PFA is a standard methodology based on best practices that can be used by countries to assess the health or the soundness of their public finance management system and start to design tailor-made reforms. We support as France the PFA Secretariat, which has the mandate to form and accompany countries in the evaluation process. There is an ongoing discussion also on how PFA Secretariat will help countries who desire technical expertise to design and conduct reform. PFA just launched a new website where you can find all the data about the PFA assessment, the score, etc., to measure budget credibility. So this is one initiative that we have been supporting. Another one is the Accelerated Peace Support Partnership Program, or PAPP program, designed to support supreme audit institutions so they can ensure budgets are spent how they should be spent. It supports currently there is a support in 9 African countries: DRC, the Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Gambia, Guinea, Madagascar, Niger, Sierra Leone, Togo, and Zimbabwe. I'm sure some other countries will benefit from this program in the next 3 years. Last thing is that we are also funding numerous bilateral projects to strengthen public finance management when requested by authorities, where we often provide some French expertise through our French civil servants. I wanted also to mention an initiative that you probably have heard of. There was a side event yesterday in the margins of Yunga, co-hosted by UNDP and OECD, which this initiative is Tax Inspectors Without Borders. Probably have heard about that. It's an initiative where inspectors from several countries go to other countries, especially developing countries, to help them kind of have a better taxation system to get more resources. The results are just amazing. They were saying yesterday that with $1 spent in an expertise on taxation, you can basically leverage $100. So the results are very interesting, and we have been funding this kind of initiative. Just to end on this, because I think, and I should have started with that, to thank the other panelists for very concrete examples of how you run your budget in your own countries to have a very sound budget. I think on our side, this is more sort of political point of view. There has been quite an improvement in many countries regarding budget transparency. I think now that the challenges is to make sure that these available budget documents are sustainable and useful. You mentioned earlier, Vivek, that there are some ways, in some cases, deviations from planned budget. Sometimes there are other ways abnormal, but I think the key is that they are properly explained to make sure citizens know why there has been different allocation in the different changes. To finish, I just wanted to say that I think overall and I think during this week in Yunga, we have a lot of discussion and events regarding the assessment of goals, where we are on SDGs, are we on track or off track. A lot of talk also about funding. We need to raise more funding, and I think what we don't have to miss, and this is, I think, the purpose also of this event, is how also we can make sure the resources that we have or that we don't have that are badly allocated or should be better allocated are not forgotten. And we have to, I think there's really a significant perspective on this, on your experiences, on the credibility of the vision, and how to use it to make sure you kind of earmark it to the basic needs, special needs of children, or health issues, or women issues, women equality. So I think on our side, I mean, as a government representative, we continue to push for what we call more broadly domestic resource mobilization. France has hosted this year the presidency of the G7. We got our G7 partners on board to continue to basically advocate for this domestic resource mobilization that they are all very keen on. And I think very concrete countries, this is one, concrete initiatives that I just talk about, the PIFA initiatives or the PAP, or other of these tax inspectors. I think they are very concrete initiatives. We should continue push the multilateral organizations, government, and other and partner countries to implement, because there are very concrete ways, apart from the big community, to move ahead and to meet the basic needs we know we need to go. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully I won't start with another backbeat from the speaker. Looks like we're doing well. First, let me thank my fellow panelists. It's been really a pleasure to listen to all of you and to the discussion also from the audience. There's a lot of rich experience out there from many different perspectives, government, NGO, that all help us on this matter. And before I get into my remarks, I particularly want to mention one thing I think hasn't come up today, but Mr. Chiswell, you alluded to it. These issues of budgets and the issues of the SDGs, of course, are not limited to low-income countries. This is for everybody. And these issues and the issues that we're discussing today are absolutely for everybody. The budget credibility issues, when it may come to timeliness of spending, perhaps that's less of an issue, but the transparency, everything else that leads to that, and some of the things that I will mention, absolutely apply to the entire world. And I hope that as we continue these discussions on the SDGs, we keep these very much in mind. The fact is that everywhere in the world, it's government budgets that translate children's rights into the realities of service delivery, and it's government budgets that are going to ultimately determine whether SDGs are or not met. And that's clearly acknowledged in the finance and development agenda. So hopefully will be, no doubt will be a big part of the larger discussion tomorrow. Before getting into budget credibility, I want to raise briefly the issue of budget quality, because that's also a prerequisite for turning budgets into to results, especially for the poorest. Better budget credibility is going to go a lot further in making a difference for the SDGs and for child rights if we're also supporting efforts towards greater equity, greater efficiency, and greater effectiveness of expenditure. Let's start with equity. If budgets favor services used by the wealthy, the poorest inevitably lose out. This happens in rich countries when the same public services are sometimes better funded in wealthier parts of the country. And a UNICEF analysis found that low-income countries spend on average 46% of their education budget on the 10% of students who reach secondary levels of education or higher, and only 10% of the budget on children in the bottom 20% of the income distribution. Unsurprisingly, in all settings, inequitable expenditure is associated with lower enrollment and higher dropout rates. The situation in health is similar. A UNICEF study in Eastern and Southern Africa found that on average, only 19% of health budgets in the region are destined for primary healthcare services. One way UNICEF hopes to address this is to encourage and support countries to monitor the equity of their sector budgets and to address the disparities they find. We've got a long way to go on this, and we of course want to collaborate as much as possible with others to make that happen. Let me share an early example of this work. UNICEF and the Pakistan Punjab state government worked together to analyze the equity of water and sanitation services. We found that the districts with the worst WASH indicators were those with the lowest budget allocations and the lowest expenditures, linking back, of course, to budget credibility. This led the state government to develop an equity-based resource allocation criteria. Equalization formulas are common around the world. Perhaps that's one of the things that we all support more. And ultimately led to a 15% increase in WASH allocations to the worst affected districts. Budget effectiveness is critical too. It matters that countries make evidence-based decisions about which interventions to fund. And efficiency matters as well. Often more can be achieved with the same or less when the right cost-effective choices are made. In Cambodia, where 33% of children under 5 are stunted, a UNICEF study found not only severe underinvestment in nutrition, but also a rather inefficient use of the meager funds that were available. The money was used to buy an expensive imported therapeutic feeding product instead of a local one. So UNICEF worked with the ministry to help identify and develop this local source of therapeutic feeding and to help make sure that it was distributed to the districts where it was most needed. The ministry, consequently seeing the impact of this work, increased the nutrition budget. Let's return now to the issue of budget credibility. It's pretty obvious, and we've been discussing all morning, that it's clear that when money isn't spent as planned, the end result is going to be fewer or poorer quality services for children and their families. But it doesn't even end there, because ministries of finance will understandably target those line ministries and those districts who are underspending for further budget cuts. Why give money to someone who isn't spending it? Or the end of the year approaches and you need to make a change, you need to make sure the budget is spent, you take it away from those who haven't spent it. So what happens then? It's the areas and the poorest people, those with the least political clout, who are going to lose out in that quite common scenario. Immunization is a clear example of a highly cost-effective intervention, which, as Vivek pointed out this morning, clearly has serious budget execution problems.
just to remind you of his stats, in 22 countries over an 8-year period, immunization budgets were underspent by almost 30%. Last year, almost 20 million children were completely unvaccinated or unvaccinated, leaving them vulnerable to measles, to whooping cough, and tetanus. As the world leader for vaccine procurement, UNICEF has a front row seat to the impact of budget credibility. We've found that vaccine procurement is often delayed or deferred due to cash shortages from over-optimistic revenue forecasts, due to insufficient funds to complete purchases because budget forecasting wasn't quite right, or simply complex procurement and payment systems. The good news is that all of those problems are solvable. One example, in Uzbekistan, UNICEF supported the government to strengthen vaccine needs projections and link them with the budget. We also helped to identify financing mechanisms to prevent the temporary cash flow issues that were delaying procurement. Those reforms have already resulted in improvements in the timeliness and completeness of vaccine purchases. So what can we do more generally to address these budget credibility issues? Our colleagues here from have already given very strong examples. So Zambia's example is very much about making better plans and budgets in the first place. They need to be based on evidence, we need costed action plans, and also to identify potential efficiency gains. I love the example of focusing on the health centers that were already nearly built. And UNICEF often supports such efforts. In Myanmar, the Ministry of Social Welfare had a pretty poor track record on both budget execution and expenditure reporting. So although there was a policy consensus in the country on the need to increase social protection interventions, the Finance Ministry was understandably reluctant to increase funding. UNICEF helped social welfare to improve its budget planning and costing and to design a budget execution tracking system for greater accountability. Those changes helped contribute to a 5-fold increase in transfers for many more children and families. Step 2, well described by Lesotho, take steps to improve expenditure management. Budget execution problems often come down to insufficient information or skills. Again, problems that can be solved. In Malawi, UNICEF provided on-the-job training to finance officers in 10 district councils, and the results were clear. In those districts, there was a 29% improvement in fund management, and in implementation tracking and reconciliation of accounts. We also help governments to monitor and manage expenditure with citizen involvement. For example, in Nepal, we're supporting real-time monitoring of social protection payments and recipient feedback on the program. UNICEF is increasingly supporting governments also to diagnose those budget execution problems at the start for child-related services, identifying any such right data. And this is where our collaboration with IBP in Eastern and Southern Africa has been invaluable in helping us support governments to take the kinds of steps to make that data more available. And we also use tools like public expenditure reviews, often in collaboration with the World Bank, to identify PM problems, including budget execution. And we've used public expenditure tracking surveys to identify where and why the problems occur with the flow of funding to service delivery, including identifying if there's a leakage or loss of government funding. To close, it's clear, and for this reason, you see UNICEF much more active in the public finance space in recent years. We will not be able to help countries realize child rights if we aren't partnering with many to make this happen. Achieving the SDGs requires attention not only to how much funding governments allocate, but to how well those funds are spent. Along with attention to budget equity and effectiveness, successful budget execution is a critical element to turning commitments into realities. UNICEF's support to government partners on this is growing rapidly, and we know that we can achieve much more by joining forces with others, including civil society, including international agencies. We hope that today's discussion is going to be another important catalyst in this work and to build further partnerships to support better budgets, better results, and real SDG progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Please.
Thank you. My name is Pooja Prasad with Society for International Development, and we coordinate the Civil Society Group for Financing for Development in the UN. The question is to Mr. Shuswell. It's a question on kind of policy coherence, which I know is a big question when we hear kind of in UN high-level week. I was quite struck by a couple of comments on how large part of the revenue is going towards debt servicing costs. And while we're here, I mean, there's a proposal to have a debt workout mechanism in the UN to actually address those sort of systemic issues that stuck as a multilateral solution. It's the same with, I mean, tax inspectors were borders is well noted, but actually there's a call for the negotiation process to address illicit outflows out of developing countries, particularly tax dodging and corporation, which is huge loss of revenue. So, I mean, there are those sorts of like sort of bigger macroeconomic kind of issues that I think we should connect back to this talking about budget credibility. And I guess my question is, what sort of conversations are probably going on in your department, thinking about kind of policy coherence, and I think the leadership that France can play in moving some of those proposals forward.
Ina, and then
Thank you. Just I think a few comments to what Aymeric said about public finance management systems that you are helping governments around. I think our government is also doing a lot on in that area in trying to improve the financial management systems, because we had issues some years back where when a lot of billions were stolen. So learning from that experience, the government is doing something to improve that. But again, one area which is still not being looked at properly is, I think, the audit institution. I've got an Auditor General's office. They presented their budget, but for some reason, I was one of we looked at their vote. Obviously, it's seriously underfunded. Because to me, this is an institution that needs to be, our government needs to channel their funds to, because rather than having funds stolen, it's better to improve your governance institution so that at least you're able to monitor the money. Because this is an institution that works closely with the Public Accounts Committee. We also talked about underspending. I think in more oftentimes it's very unfair to talk of underspending, because what happens is in our budget, when you talk of underspending, it's money not given in the first place. So how can you underspend when you haven't been given? So one way of running our government would always say that such an institution underspent, yet money was not given. Comment on Alexandra, you talked about, you mentioned something about cash transfer. You also my good neighbor from Zambia, Malawi and Zambia neighbor, very good neighbors. You talked about cash transfer system. I'm not sure whether that's, we have got similar program in Malawi, but publicly, I cannot speak against this program because that would mean I don't want my seat. But what I've always questioned this program. I've got an example in my constituency, an old woman. She was given about maybe $100 for the first time. It was from rags to riches and rags again. After she got this money, she went and bought a tray of eggs, nice stuff. She ate. Almost a week. For a week, she was rich. After that, she was back to poverty again. So I'm not sure whether this is the way we're just throwing money to people like that. The good thing is our government has now moved in. There's a program among rural women whereby they're in groups, sometimes groups of 20. They contribute their little resources, maybe in our local currency, about 2,000 kwacha. You divide by 175, you get the dollar equivalent. They put together, then they lend to each other. Now, government in this year's budget has jumped on that because this money they don't eat. They do business using this money. And sometimes it can grow to meaningful levels. I've wrote on this before. I distributed a little bit of cash because I knew it was a vote earner. Women are always good voters. Once they say I'll vote for you, they'll vote for you. So I use this one. I give the little money I had to several groups of women. Up to now, when I go to the village, because the women tell me, oh, you helped us. I used that money, I borrowed the money, did some business. Now I'm sending my daughter or my son to school. They're in school because of that money. So that's what I'm thinking. Would not it be good to, rather than just giving money to women, to people, to poor people in the village, so social tax transfer, to have early Christmas. rather than this kind of way. Maybe they're doing their little business this way. I think it's more empowerment rather than just you give them today, and tomorrow they're poor again. I don't think you can lift anybody out of poverty by giving them today just to spend. Then tomorrow they're back to rags again. Yeah, and on the issue talked about helping councils to do financial reporting and all that stuff. Yes, we noticed that the councils that you helped were able to report to Parliament in good time. But maybe another area which need to be looked at is helping the legislature itself to know how to track, because our job is to more the oversight role is budget tracking. So not all of us have got the same kind of background. We go there as members of Parliament. They don't vote for me because I know accounts. They vote for me because I promise something nice. So when I go there, I'm in this committee where I've got no clue at all. I just depend on my intuition to know what to do. You are given volumes and volumes of budget documents, which you have got no knowledge about. The good thing is that now our Parliament has established a budget office. So maybe those are the areas you need as UNICEF and other cooperative partners. You need to invest more, whatever you have, so that at least our people, by the end of the day, our people in villages are helped. Thank you.
Veena?
Yeah, Veena Palikal with the National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights from Delhi. Just taking off from where Wilson left, actually, the budget for manual scavenging, for example, remains unutilized almost till till September of that particular year. Our financial year is from April to March. So which means in 6 months, they try to finish off or it remains unutilized. So I'd like to know in other countries, how does it happen? You know, is there like, does utilization happen like us in the last end of the year? Or is there, you know, periodic utilization on a monthly basis? That's my first question. My second question is that even if the budget is utilized, most of the budget is diverted for causes that are not particularly for that specific cause. For manual scavenging, for example, or for, let's take for children's education, rather than actually going to the children's education or for elimination of manual scavenging, it goes for building, you know, administrative expenses or making of buildings. So I think the quality of expenses also is very important in this. My third question is to all the panelists, including Vivek as well, that is there any country that actually, which is the one country in the world or two countries in the world, you must have done a lot of research on this, which is actually spending 100% of the expenditure at the end of the year, and also looking at quality, whether they're actually spending for the cause that they have allocated for. Thank you.
All right, let's go back to the panelists to answer. Maybe starting from here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. Very positive Malawi regarding the need to fund audit institutions. It's something that is and when I here in Europe, it's something we don't hear much about. We hear a lot about funding education, etc. We need that because I think for many years, and especially in the development bubble, there was a lot of talk about infrastructure, and we know that to fight against inequalities, we need to go to the core, health, education, and others. But I think there's sometimes we kind of forget the public institutions that are needed in terms of finance ministries and taxation administration with strong competencies, trained employees to get the revenue that these countries need, and the other institutions that have very important and complementary role to oversight what the government is doing. I mean, we have a long tradition in France, and I know we have also some expertise in this matter that we provide to some countries, and I think it's really something we need also multilateral organization and others and others not to forget if we want to help build this some audit system. Maybe to answer this question on the policy coherence, I think you're totally right. It's not an easy task, especially I would say there are two elements. The first is sort of structural elements within our countries where you have a sort of silos discussion. The Minister of Finance discusses on one end, the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the others. I think what the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 brings is to have all these institutions supposed to better work together. I'm thinking in terms of the big multilateral organization with the work that needs to be done even better between World Bank, IMF, and the UN. They have, to be honest, not worked very often all together for years. I think this has changed a lot, but I think we need to go further on this. What is difficult, and this is more a moment, a conjunctural issue, is that and France has a big priority on this, that we are in a sort of fragmented international multilateral world. We know that we have pieces kind of going apart. We are trying with a lot of other governments to stand still and to help system to stay afloat, to be honest. And this is not easy when you need to discuss about trade and climate, for instance. We need to discuss about trade and development to forge consensus and move forward on these issues when you have already some, game regarding the basic norms on, and you know what I mean, regarding trade. And another issue that we are very keen to look on, and there was a big event in the spring in Paris on debt sustainability that was held by the Minister of Finance of France with several stakeholders, including World Bank President and IMF Director General. The issue is how we keep the multilateral institutions we have set up over years, such as the Club de Paris, the Club of Paris regarding debt sustainability, in the context of some tendency, or some, for us, it's kind of a risk that other institutions are set up apart with other stakeholders with different norms that are, in our sense, not the best for the countries concerned by their high level of debt. And in terms of our own coherence nationally, we have a development bank called AFD, Agence Française de Développement. We have a very strong oversight. My ministry and the Ministry of Finance, we both sit in the board where we have a sort of a big voice in the board whenever there is a project with a loan that is provided to developing countries. We have a strong oversight that with a lot of different control mechanism that we avoid that loans can put in danger some the local government or government of the developing country.
It's interesting. Let me come first to the issue of cash transfers. While it's a little bit outside of the specifics here, it is very much what our team in UNICEF, the social policy team in UNICEF, works on with governments. I can't resist responding to a common and valid concern, and to say that cash transfer programs usually are parts of larger social protection systems. Social protection includes social assistance, it includes labor interventions, it includes efforts to help people connect with work. And even where it's social assistance, one of the things that we do as UNICEF is also try to make sure that you're using the opportunity to connect people to services. Not everybody can work, not everybody will have something to sell or a way to do it. There will be many environments where that small addition will make a big difference between somebody eating enough or not, between children going to school or not, and between the nutritional levels and outcomes of those children. Loads and loads of evidence, in particular for Eastern and Southern Africa, but frankly all over the world. And for children in particular, let me mention that many countries in the world provide child benefits on a regular basis to either to the youngest children or indeed to all children in the family. The extent to which this has reduced child poverty in OECD countries is super clear. It makes a very big difference. That's not a lot of money. It's not enough money to stop somebody from working, but it's enough to help ensure the well-being of kids in the household. I think what's important here, it's not to say that the productive issues you mentioned aren't important. They are very important. And in fact, we are looking at that more and more in UNICEF as we start trying to be even more true to our own mandate to ensure that we're working for children up to the age of 18. Because when you start talking about 15, 16, 17-year-olds, they're looking to their future. They want to know how they're going to enter the workforce. Part of social protection should be those mechanisms that help young people to enter the workforce, and that's something that you should see. The issue of helping expenditure, yes, yes, yes. We very much, this is something that as in my previous post as representative in the Republic of Moldova in Eastern Europe, we work closely with the Parliament Budget Committee to help train not only them, but more of the parliamentarians to understand and read the budget, because I know you guys are working on making it more understandable, but it's hard to understand from somebody who doesn't have that background. And it is actually the responsibility of parliamentarians. How are they going to do that if they don't have the knowledge of how that works and it's made more accessible to them? So what can I say? Couldn't agree with you more. And it is something that we work on in some countries. It's an area where we sometimes collaborate. It's a very good area for our collaboration with other UN agencies. UNDP's work on democratic governance, for example. I really, there was a point made about budgets sometimes going unutilized because the money is never provided. It isn't actually provided. You have to be very careful about saying, that something is underspent. This is, I wanted to link that issue, and so we absolutely agree that that's a concern, and the issue of it being spent, that funds might be spent on, they might be destined for support to a Dalit community, but they're spent on the district officer who's supposed to help the Dalit community rather than on the Dalit community. This brings me back to a phrase I like to use called retail PFM. I don't know, I think I might have made it up. But the idea that you have to get down into the weeds, you have to really follow to the local level. Where is the money going? What is the bottleneck? And yes, from my understanding, the bottle, it may be the Ministry of Finance hasn't released it on time. It may be that the right piece of paper to request the money at the right time wasn't filled. There are so many different small elements that can be addressed to fix those problems along the way, but you have to find them first. So you have to go looking for them. And that's what I mean by retail PFM, and something that we're encouraging our colleagues to work together with their sector colleagues around the world to help our partners to do more and more.
We have run out of time, and so I'm going to just give some closing remarks so that people can also go to their other meetings. Thank you everyone for coming to this meeting. I know a discussion on budgets would not generally be a first for people, especially when there's so many other rich conversations that are happening at the UN this week. But I'd like to just place this discussion in the context of what's happening around the world with closing civic spaces, but also more importantly, one aspect of democracy perhaps working, in which elected representatives are coming out of a majority of people in their countries voting for them. Let's agree that that is happening in many countries. But that's only one aspect of democracy. The other aspect of democracy is the protection of minority rights. You have this brute that is taking place in so many countries. What is happening is that people are being left behind. And the SDG theme of leaving no one behind becomes particularly important in that context. And budget credibility becomes important in that context, because it is 10 or 15 or 20% of budgets that don't get spent. But when one looks at who does not get that money, it is the manual scavengers community. It is the most vulnerable sections of our population who are getting left behind. So if we are truly committed to taking all sections of society together, we need to focus on issues like improving budget credibility, building strong public finance management systems, because that will afford the kinds of protection that the SDG is calling for. The next several months, we are planning to keep the momentum going from this conversation and have national level discussions in Argentina, in Nigeria, in 9 other countries. Our civil society partners have engaged with their governments and will continue to do so on getting their budgets to be better implemented. And we'll have global level events also being planned in Washington, DC in the early part of December. If you go on our website, internationalbudget.org, you can find out more information, including a lot more resources related to the research that we have undertaken on budget credibility. We would welcome your engagement in these discussions. Please do us, please help spread the word on the importance of governments getting their budgets to be more credible, getting public finance management systems to be made more in line with what is expected, so that we don't leave people behind. Thank you.
Good to see you.